On this episode of Still Loading, the OG Goku. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this new episode of the Still Loading podcast. I'm your host, Josh Koval, and today on the show, I have an extremely special guest that I'm so happy I get to sit down with. He is a voice actor. He also does more than just voiceover work. He is a writer. He is also he works in animation, like outside of just the voice acting parts of it. I'm butchering the actual technical name for what you do outside of it. But with me today is James Corlett. Ian, how are you doing today?
I'm great. Happy to be here.
Thank you so much for setting aside some time for this. I was honestly surprised when I contacted you. I was honestly not expecting to get such a prompt response, but you jumped right on that. So thank you so much for getting back to me so quickly. I'm excited to speak to you. So to kick things off, I guess some of the credits I at least want to shout out for my listeners so they get to know you a little bit better. Obviously, you were the original voice of Goku.
Yes.
From there's a pre-Funimation edit, right? Of the pre-Funimation dub of Dragon Ball Z, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And you've done voiceover work in animation and video games, and honestly, so I'm looking at your credits right now and I'm kind of freaking out. This is this is only niche just to me, like specific to me and my friend Garrett. You did the voice of Jay from the video game Sledstorm.
Holy smokes. I did?
That's what it says on IMDb.
Sure,
I don't know
if it says it on the interweb, it must be true.
It's gotta be true.
I just can't remember, honestly. Like that. How long ago is that? What year is that?
Game came out in 99, and in all honesty, most of your voiceover work, if it would have been for anything for this, it would have been little one-liners like keep it real or something like that. Very quick.
Sounds about right.
One-offs. Not a whole lot of character that you get to build into it.
Right.
But you also were the voice of Mega Man, and specific to this podcast. Now, Ian, I didn't tell you this off the top, is I do a series, my friend Dexter and I do a series on this show where we are watching we're doing a rewatch series. Once a month we do an episode on it for Captain N the Game Master. And you were the voice of Dr. Wily from Captain N the Game Master. And that's actually how. So it's funny because when I was looking through, I'm like, I need to get more Captain N voice actors on, and almost every one of you have this amazing career since that show. But you've just done so much. So I say all of that just to add a little bit of context for the listeners so they know who you are, some of the work that you've done. I mean, there's so many big credits. You were Bob in Reboot.
Yeah.
You were also the conductor in Dinosaur Train.
Hello,
right?
Pteranodon family.
There you go. And you created your own cartoon, which I actually am really excited to talk about, which I did not know until I started doing a little bit of research for this interview, called Being Ian, which came out in 2004 and 2008. I actually watched an episode on Amazon, and I was pleasantly surprised. It was really good.
Thank you.
I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, that was a big deal for me.
I guess to kick this all off, I'm going to start off with a kind of a generic question, but how did you first enter into the voice acting industry? How did you first get into, let's start off with, how did you first get into acting? And then how did that go over into voice acting? Was it at the same time? Did one transition into the other? How did this kind of all begin?
Well, that's a good question. I'm one of the few guys or actors who really just focused on voice acting. I think you'll find a lot of people, they have a story of, being in plays or TV shows or something. And then something changes and then they go, hey, I think I'm going to try this. Or, they get invited to be a guest on a cartoon or something. But for me, I mean, yes, I was in plays in school, but my beginnings in the business of show really went back to when I was a kid. I was into magic and ventriloquism.
Oh,
And
okay.
I was a terrible magician, but I was a pretty good ventriloquist, and obviously that is very voice related.
Yes.
Um, Also, I was into puppets, so I
Mhm.
really, that's what I did. So, eh, you know, when you're doing puppets and you've got one on each hand, they have to be different voices. So I kind of,
Mhm.
cut my teeth that way. And then I transitioned into filmmaking. I was a whiz kid teenage filmmaker. That's back before. I mean, there was videotape, but
Yeah.
I was making films on 8 millimeter.
A
Uh,
lot the barrier to entry was a lot higher then.
it was huge. It was huge.
Yeah.
So there's a real plus to that because no one was doing it. So you could be kind of mediocre and be a whiz kid. Like, wow,
Yeah.
you made a film. So like a film like The Fablemans, if you've seen that, really spoke to me because that was me. That was what I did. So from there, I won an award. There was a film competition in British Columbia in Canada. That's the province, British Columbia.
Mhm.
Um, and when I was in grade 12, 12th grade, as we say in America, I won the Most Promising Filmmaker Award, which is kind of like,
Oh,
best of show. And I promptly
yeah.
retired because
Went out on top.
exactly, I'm leaving.
Yeah.
So I decided this was before Vancouver was known as Hollywood North or had
Mhm.
any kind of film industry. So I wanted to take the Spielberg route if I was going to continue in filmmaking and
Mhm.
just like start sweeping up on a production or work for just as a jobber Joe boy for something, but that didn't exist in Vancouver. So I hung it up because I didn't want to be an starving artist filmmaker, and I didn't want to work for a TV station. So I kind of went to work at the family business, which was a piano and music store. And that's
Mhm.
if you watch the any of the episodes of Being Ian, you will realize pretty quickly, like, oh yeah, he really he did. He was raised in a music store
Well, you wrote
environment.
the theme song and performed it, right?
Yeah, yeah. So that's what I did, and because I wanted to make a living, and then I realized that Vancouver did have a very vibrant audio production industry. So
Yeah.
by that I mean like jingles for commercials,
Mm.
um, and from that music part of commercial, for radio and TV, came this group that did kind of comedic uh, ads, for big companies. And I
Mhm.
realized on a trip to California, family trip to California, and I think also one in Hawaii, where I was listening to the radio and I went, oh my goodness, those are like the guys that's the weatherman in Vancouver. And that guy
Oh.
is from Dr. Bondolo, a sketch comedy show. And I went,
Mhm.
okay, hang on. So there is a business here. And I was always into animation. My films were largely animated films. So I kind of went ding, 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 ding. I think that's what I'm going to do. So I started knocking on doors, began working in commercials as a voice actor, kind of as a character guy. This is my early 20s. And then in the 80s, the animation work started to trickle up to Hollywood North, and the rest is history.
Okay. Did you experience any like difficulties since you didn't come from like a quote unquote trained acting background like that you kind of like was there any difficulties having to learn to kind of act on the fly as it were?
No, it actually really suited me. I'm a very good sight reader,
Mhm.
and I'm a terrible memorizer. So I mean, all the plays, the total of 5 or something that I did, I was never off book entirely. It was a real detriment because, I mean, to be a good actor, you can't be thinking about what your line is. It's
Yeah.
it's gotta be just, like, automatic, and I don't think I have people say, "Oh, you could learn, you could learn." I don't know. I think I might have a circuit missing. So it was a plus for me. I can read, and in fact, I'm better on my first blush. Like, I don't even want to rehearse it.
Yeah.
This is not like tips for young actors at all.
No,
Do
this is
not,
just what works for you.
yeah, do not confuse this with acting advice. It's just what works for me, as you said.
I can understand that. I feel like I mean, it's different with my podcast, but a lot of times if I found with any type of thing that I try to do creatively, if I try to put too much thought into it, I try to be much too intentional, then it almost doesn't work out as much as I like it
Often,
versus
yeah.
when I have the idea, I know what I want to do, and then I just kind of run with it and see where it takes me. And I feel like it just depends on the person. And it seems like for you, it just works better to kind of run with it. Like where you prepare as much as you need to, but if you prepare too much, I don't know, I'm not going to speak for you, but at least for me, I almost psych myself out,
Yep.
like I put too much in my own head.
Yep. That can happen.
Um, you've done so many different roles and different voiceover work, and I try not to focus in these interviews too much on like, oh, what was it like here? I'm like, well, that's a very vague question. I find it kind of hard. Like, what do you mean? What was it like? So, what I kind of want to ask with this was that, did you find it difficult? Like, I guess transitioning from radio work over to characters, was it something that it was just natural, like you were naturally able to figure out characters as you went along, or was there any type of growing pains going on through from, because I think, like you said, if I'm remembering correctly to just a couple minutes ago, you said you kind of started off with doing like the kind of like the commercial jingles, right?
Yeah, well,
Or did you go straight in?
no, the companies that I worked for were known as jingle companies. Like
Oh,
they were
okay.
musicians and composers, and as an offshoot of that business, they started to produce and write the actual, comedic commercials, the dialogue, the characters, the actors.
Okay.
So it's kind of like two separate things. So I was really, I've been in and around music my whole life, but I was not like a session player or anything with these companies. I was strictly, one of the new breed at that time of voice actors. So
Mhm.
it wasn't very difficult for me because, as I mentioned, I, uh, I had this acting background. Obviously, when you're starting, you gotta work on your craft. But uh,
Mhm.
com- this is kind of like a non-answer. Like, I'm kind of I had a natural aptitude. Let's put it that way.
Okay.
So it's not like I had never been on stage. It's not like it was like brand new. And I pitched myself to these commercial production companies as a character voice guy.
Mm.
And it was very odd. So, like, I mean, if there needed an accent or anything that was kind of not the announcer, that's where I slotted myself in. But the weirdest thing was, a few years into my career, maybe earlier, I remember the first time a client went, "Well, no, we just want you to sound like you." And I went, "What?
What?
That's weird. How am I going to do that?" So that was probably the most jarring thing for me, because when you're doing a character, you just dive in, and you know, uh, characters in commercials are often kind of cartoony anyway,
Mhm.
and that wasn't that tough. It's kind of bigger and broader, but I was very fortunate in that era of the sort of mid '80s, early to mid '80s. Commercials were transitioning from this, everyone sounded like an announcer,
Mhm.
to, oh no, we just want it to sound like the guy next door. And I'm like, ooh, that's great, because I don't have that other voice. Or I certainly didn't at that time. So yeah, it was not that tough. And then transitioning from commercials to animation was like a gift, because it was like, oh my God, this is exactly what I wanted to do in the first place.
So much more creativity. You're allowed so much more creativity in that.
Yeah, definitely.
You mentioned, actually, I was watching an interview with you at RetroCon from a year ago or so, or when you did a panel there, and you were talking about how a lot of now, because you brought up cartoony voices and how like the types of voices they were looking for, but you mentioned on the panel about how there were, like, now they're looking for more quote unquote real voices, less
Yep.
quote unquote cartoony. I was wondering, in your own opinion, which do you prefer? Not saying like which is better
No.
necessarily, but just in your own opinion, what do you prefer doing more?
Well, I prefer cartoony voices. It's just my natural default, and I think that it, I things change
Hmm.
by decades, and I think the great thing about the state of animation right now is that there's both. There is
Hmm.
not one way of doing it. Like in the 40s and when animation was beginning, 20s, 30s, 40s, everything was cartoony. Everything was huge, right? It was like
Yeah,
big and broad and very stagey. But if everything was, let's make it real, like, well, see, but there's as I'm saying this, it even a show like Adventure Time or Bob's Burgers, I mean, there's still huge characters within those shows. It's just
yeah.
the general vibe, or the main characters are more, real-ish sounding than they might have been previously. So,
It's almost like the zany characters are there to show the juxtaposition
yeah,
between the quote unquote more real characters. So the zaniness stands out a lot more.
yeah. So there's variety, right? I mean, there's room for everything.
That's all. I'm kind of with you on the more cartoony looks. Not saying one is better than the other, of course. It's just more of a matter of preference. But I'm always been, obviously, as with most people who grew up with Looney Tunes, like Mel Blanc is just so much fun to listen to.
Yes. Yeah.
Is the crazy places he takes his voice to. Um,
Well,
I
and
want,
just while we're talking about, since you mentioned Mel Blanc, and
of
this
course,
is my opinion of Mel Blanc is really, I think it's controversial, because
oh,
while I have huge respect for him, like, I mean, I grew up not only listening to him on, like, all the Warner Brothers cartoons,
hmm,
but I was like a vintage radio nerd, which also speaks to my career path, right? I remember thinking as a little kid, there was a show that would come on in the evening about 10 o'clock at night on the radio, and they would play these classic radio comedies and classic radio mysteries. And I absolutely loved them. Even though I was a child of television, I
yeah,
really, really enjoyed these old radio shows. And I always thought to myself, oh man, if I was born back then, I would have been in radio. That would have been really cool. So anyway, that's a long way to say that, like, I knew who Mel Blanc was in a broader sense than just, oh, he's Bugs Bunny, right?
yeah.
So so this is with complete reverence and acknowledgement of his incredible talent. The bottom line, though, for me, is like every character sounds like Mel Blanc.
Okay, like in terms of
Yeah.
personality.
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
you've got Bugs, and then you've got Tweety, who's just, a pitched Bugs with a baby impediment,
Yeah.
Um, so, do not get me wrong. I'm not ragging on, he's a hack. Everything sounded the same. Yeah,
No, no,
there's a clip for your promo. Yeah.
Oh, don't worry. I'll
Corlett
make sure to
thinks
clip it and make
Corlett.
it sound as awful as no, I'm just kidding.
No, I would welcome it. A little bit of controversy would be great. No, so that's what my point is about Mel. Like, he's great, but like all of us, I mean, you've got a range, and when you listen, you go, oh yeah, I know that guy. Like that's Mel. You know?
I've never heard that. I mean, I think there is some element of it too, where it's like, since he is the most well known of that era, and I'm not even counting. I don't consider myself like an animation buff
Yeah.
or anything like that. It's just, if you are have a passing interest in Looney Tunes, you know who Mel Blanc is, type of thing.
Sure.
So I'm always interested. That's a very interesting opinion. I'm not well versed enough to have a debate back and forth, but I see where you're coming from with that. You're like specifically with the Tweety and Bugs comparison. I totally see what you're going at with that.
Yeah.
Or sorry, where you're coming from with that. Transitioning a little bit, I wanted to ask you about your work outside of VO. Like
Sure.
I am going to talk a little bit at the end about like Captain N, and if you have any memories of recording it back then. I know that was back in 89 and 90, so I don't know if you have anything, but we'll get to that towards the end of the episode. But what I want to ask before that is I wanted to talk about your work outside of VO, because you've done a lot of writing in cartoons as well, not just acting. I was actually really surprised looking at your credits. Like I knew you created Being Ian, but then I would look back at some of your other writing credits, and you worked on Rainbow Fish. You did a couple episodes of Roly Poly Oly.
Yeah.
And then you also did some stuff for Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z.
Oh, yeah.
For a handful. I guess my question is, in what ways did your work as a voiceover artist and as a voiceover actor aid you with writing, and then vice versa? How did writing inform your acting?
Well, that's a very good question, because now that you know my history, before I started getting into voice acting,
Mm-hmm.
it makes a lot of sense, because so I've hit the jackpot, and I'm merrily moving through my voiceover career, and I'm reading script after script after script after script after script, and I'm thinking,
Mm-hmm.
I could do this, because I've done this. Like I made films and I wrote
Yeah.
scripts, and so my end goal was to get enough credibility to create my own show. That was the whole trajectory. So
Okay.
I wanted to write for any and all productions that would have me, and build up a resume so that I could then walk into producers and people that make deals happen and say, "Oh yeah, of course I can create a show, because look, I've written on all of these shows, but now there's this one that I want to do." So
Mm-hmm.
that was how it all kind of came to be.
That's really, I mean, like you said, I guess it really isn't surprising that you transitioned to that with, like you're talking about, you're making your own movies when you're in high school, and it especially sticks out in Being Ian. Like I said, I only got a chance to watch one episode, but it was season 2, episode 1, where Ian and his brothers are kicked out by their parents. They want to watch You guys want to watch wrestling, and you can't. And you go to the community center, and your brothers are stuck in a motivational speaker seminar, and you try to sneak out and get stuck in a hospital.
Yeah.
But the thing I noticed from that one episode, it's packed with movie and film references.
Yep.
And it very much, like, that was actually one of the questions I had written down, or just a points to bring up, is it really, like, it was kind of cool to see from here how much of a fan you are of just film and media, and, like, whether it's television or movies, or as you mentioned just a bit ago, radios.
Yeah.
And I guess I was wondering, would you classify yourself as a bit of a film buff then?
Oh, absolutely. I'm a film snob.
Okay. And actually, specifically this episode, and it's kind of germane to the podcast here, you reference Goldfinger in that episode with Gold. It's his ear. I forget what you call him.
Yeah. Oh, good
It's
one.
like
I
like
can't
shiny
remember.
lobe or gold lobe or something like that. I forget what or something along
It
those
must have been
lines.
good, because I'm laughing now.
It was pretty funny. It was pretty. Well, the reason I say it's germane to the show, for my Patreons, for the patrons over there, I have a whole separate podcast called Still Bonding.
Oh,
where
wow.
it's me and my friend
I'm a huge
covering.
James Bond fan.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I mean, my Twitter handle, I think, is
Yes,
Ian
it's
James
Ian James
007.
Yes, it is. I even thought about it when I saw it on your Twitter. I'm like, he's got 007 in his name there.
Yep.
Yeah, we've been having such a fun time going through the whole all the movies. We're currently, by the time this episode comes out, by the time everyone hears I'm trying to think. The Live and Let Die will have been released,
Oh,
and then we're
wow.
going to be getting ready for Man with the Golden Gun.
Yeah.
Uh, moving right along there. Well, then I have to ask you, since I do have a lot of James Bond content for my Patreons, who's your favorite Bond?
I'm going to go with, this is a long answer.
By all means, go for it. I'm here for it.
The simple short answer is Daniel Craig.
That's the correct answer.
And
go on.
Yeah, and that is buoyed by Roger Moore's opinion, who reportedly said, I mean, he's so good. And I mean, that's Roger Moore saying it. So I'm with Roger. And then on the topic of Roger Moore, and it's interesting. This has come up in my career specifically because of the Dragon Ball thing, because there have been a number of Gokus. And for me, when I was growing up, James Bond was Roger Moore. That was my Bond. And I think, I'm not sure how other people feel about it, but that's the Bond is the guy that was in front of you, right? Like
he's the Bond that you grew up with.
The Bond that you grew up with. And it's not that I didn't like Sean Connery but the magic of the James Bond series is that for every era, and this also connects to what we were talking about with realistic voices in cartoons versus cartoony voices in cartoons, every Bond was the right Bond, more or less, for the era of what was happening in movies at the time.
100%. Yeah.
So the thing that I loved about, like when I first saw Pierce Brosnan in Remington Steele, I went, this is the next Bond. There he is. Yep. He's right there. And then there was, you probably know all this, like the contractual stuff. And
I know a decent amount, but you can, if you want to go into it, you're more than welcome to.
Basically he was locked into a TV contract, and the short story is he wasn't allowed to do Bond.
Yep. And that's why they went with Dalton for those two movies.
Who was, my least favorite Bond? Timothy Dalton.
Okay.
I just thought he was a dud. But then as I got older, now I remember going to, I would have been about 19, and there was a Bond. This is before. I mean, we had VHS tapes, but they were not readily available. Like every movie ever made, like it's not like we have today. So there would be there was this what would you call it? What do you call it when you
would it be like a cable marathon?
Marathon. Thank you.
There you go.
No, it was actually in a movie theater.
I was in the theaters.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we went. My friends and I went, and we just like let's see how many we can get through, because they played them, but like over 24 hours or whatever it was.
Wow.
However many Bond movies there were, and I can't tell you how many I got through or didn't. But what I realized was there was a movie that I have rewatched twice in the last 5 years that I think is the most underrated Bond movie and Bond. And you probably are gonna guess.
Can I take a guess?
Yeah, take a
guess? I'm gonna guess it's On Her Majesty's Secret Service.
Ding 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 ding.
With George Lazenby. Yeah.
Yep. That was a great film, and he was great.
Especially considering he had no acting background really before that movie.
I know. And his whole story, there's that Hulu documentary,
Everything or Nothing, I want to say. Or no.
I think it was like
Being Bond?
Being Bond, I think.
I don't think I watched that one yet. I saw the Everything or Nothing documentary. I still have to watch Being Bond.
You need to watch that. Yeah.
I will definitely watch it.
It's great because I mean, he is a character and honestly, you watch that and you go, "I don't know how much of this is bullshit." Oh, can I swear? Can I swear on your
Yeah, yeah, you can
okay.
swear.
Like, he's just one of those guys that you go, "Is that did that happen?" Well, it's a really good story. I don't care.
No, it's he what is it? He got it. One of the reasons he got it is because he could throw a good punch, and he does. Like
Yeah.
the physicality of Lazenby is surprisingly really good. He even got in the scene where spoiler alert for those who haven't seen a movie from 1969. Um, uh, Bond's wife dies in the movie,
Yeah.
and he in one of the in a cut version of that scene in an alternate take, he cried. He was able to get himself to cry, and they're like, Bond wouldn't cry,
Oh, wow.
and I'm like, I almost would have preferred it, like because otherwise, I was listening to a different podcast and they bring it up where it's like he almost kind of goes into a fantasy where he's like, it's all right, she's just having a rest.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, there was a chance that there's a whole bunch of crazy fun facts about it. I almost want to have if you ever want to come on Still Bonding, you are more than welcome to. They're long recording sessions, but you can jump in and out however you would feel like.
Well, that's kind of
When
my
I say
jam, jumping in and out.
that, I mean they're like 3 to 4 hour recording sessions. We go, it's
Wow.
really long. Yeah, we go a very long time, and I could gush more about Bond, but I might
Yes.
I want to I'll keep it. I might talk to you more off mic about James Bond because I could talk about Bond for hours
Okay.
and hours. Um, uh, all right, I don't know how to transition out of that, so I'm just going to kind of state it's a hard transition, and of course that makes it at least passable. We're going to take a hard right turn here, and I want to ask you a little bit more about your voiceover work, and then I want to get into being Ian and just
Sure.
kind of your work on that. With your voiceover work, specifically, uh, in your Rolodex of voices that you kind of have like in your pocket, is there a voice that you have that you've always wanted to do a character for but have not been able to?
Oh, that's a good question. I've been really fortunate to be able to fit in my little favorites most. Like, I don't think anything's missing. Now, that's a kind of a interesting statement, isn't it? Because, like, yeah, I'm tapped out. That's it. I've done them all.
Well, just because you don't have one now doesn't mean you won't always have one in the future. Everyone's always evolving. So
Exactly.
even if you don't have one right now, but so that's all right. I was just more curious. I like to ask voice actors that because I find if I was a voice actor, I would almost feel like there is some voice that I always have wanted to do, but never really have gotten the chance to. So I'm curious if other voice actors have that.
I
Or
think I guess I'm fortunate because it's certainly not top of mind. Like, oh wow, if I could only, um, there's roles and shows that I would love to have been on or done.
Mhm.
But that's a different question completely. I've yeah, I and again, every character sometimes you don't realize you have it until you start working on it and go, "Oh, right, that guy. I'm going to do him."
Mm.
So, yeah, I've
Is
got an
that
arsenal.
And is that a fun sense of discovery for you? Does that make a project that much more interesting when you're able to kind of discover a new voice that you didn't know you had before?
Yes, it is.
Can you provide any examples of from your previous work where you're like, oh wow, I was not expecting I had this voice in me?
Well, I've kind of said this in so many words in this interview where similar to my commercial career where, I started as this character guy and then, they asked me to just sound like me. When when I started in cartoons, again, I was a character guy. Like the broader the better and the funnier the better. And
Hmm.
then suddenly it was in the 90s and I started getting cast as like the young hero. So and
Hmm.
in that little bucket is Goku, um, Glitch Bob from Reboot, even Mega Man. And I'm going, those guys sound like it's me. They just sound like me. Now, so that means
Mhm.
I have to act. Ooh, like you're not hiding behind a
Yeah.
crazy character. So it's kind of like a reverse answer to your question. Those are the ones that really surprise me. Like, you want me to sound like a hero? Ew.
Huh. So it's almost like not necessarily the voice itself was the surprise. It was the discovery of like, oh, I have to be this type of character. So it was almost like a challenge to or taking you out of your comfort zone as an
Yes.
actor, as it were.
Yeah, exactly. And as a result, I've become a way better uh, dramatic actor for things
Mm.
like video games. Because video games, there isn't one type of video game, but largely they are more theatrical in tone,
Yep.
and they want a guy to sound just like he's in the middle of something and he's real.
Had a hard life.
Exactly, yeah. So that has, I mean, this is years ago that I started doing heroes, but it challenged me to be, not a comedic actor necessarily. Not that Mega Man was not comedic. What a hilarious, stupid show that was. Super fighting robots. Now I've got your power. All of that stuff. But it's yeah. So it's the opposite. I was challenged and surprised that I could not be funny all the time in my characters.
I could see that because I feel like with being humorous, it almost feels like part of it, like it kind of lends itself to the way you kind of described your approach. Like I find it easier to be funny off the cuff than like really just thinking, like really plotting it out and thinking about it. Like I'm always amazed when there are people who can be funny like intentionally versus just saying something off the cuff in the
Ah,
moment, something witty and clever.
right.
So I almost feel like, I don't know if it's the same for you, but I would almost feel like being able to be like comedic is is an easier leap with your style of just kind of like being able to sight read something.
Yeah.
Am I right with that, or am I kind of off
No,
base?
no, you're right.
I just didn't want to. I was worried that could come off as like as an insult. I didn't want it to come off as an
No, no, no,
insult.
no, no. My my
Um,
my default is humor. In everything and like everything. So so it's more of a challenge for me to be very serious and dramatic than, the opposite.
yeah. I could see that. I would have a similar, if I was an actor, I would have a similarly hard time. Um and speaking of challenges though, I wanted to transition into the challenge of creating your own shows. And I see from IMDb there's two shows that you have do you have more than two shows that you have creator credits for?
Um
I see
yeah, I
Yvonne
have
of
it's
the
like
Yukon and then Being
it's
Ian.
2.5, and it's by a technicality. I also got I don't think I actually got a creator credit, but it's this weird law in France. The series that I'm talking about is called Pirate Express, and because I
Mm,
wrote the pilot episode, you're automatically credited with some form of the creation of the show. So yeah,
interesting.
but I don't think I'm actually credited as a creator. Wrote the theme song for that one too. So that's a deep dive.
That leads me to a couple other questions too, but I want to stay focused on what my
Sure,
current
sure.
line of questioning is, and then we'll transition off of that.
Yes, Your Honor.
For, for as creator of Being Ian, what was it like? What was the transition like to running a show, writing a show, as well as acting on the show and doing like you wore so many hats on that from what I can tell, you wore so many hats working on that production. So how difficult was it to balance all that compared to your normal workload?
Uh, I absolutely relished it. I loved it. I drew the line. I, yeah, this is a funny one. I probably should have voice directed it. Not that it didn't come out good. But I was
Mhm.
trying to be. I was tr- I was trying with intention to not be the dogmatic show creator that needs to do everything.
Yeah.
Even though I was doing lots, I was acting as the story editor. I specifically chose to not play the role of Ian. Um,
Mhm.
that was just a choice. I went, no, I don't think so. Let's not do that. So I made sure that I chose ancillary voices that were, characters within the show that would always show up, and that kind of stuff. And at the same time, like, one of the first things I did after I wrote the pitch document was to write the theme song with my fantastic uh, music writing partner, Brian Hoot Gibson.
Okay.
And he is at least 15 years, maybe 20 years. He's 20 years my elder.
Okay.
And he was one of the guys that was the prime movers and shakers in that early commercial industry that I was referencing in jingles. Like, he wrote, if you're old enough to remember this, the Rice-A-Roni theme. Rice-A-Roni, the San Francisco treat. He wrote that.
Yeah.
So
Wow.
that came out of Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada, as well as a million other. He also wrote the this is another favorite, iconic. Where are you geographically? I forgot to ask you.
I'm over on the East Coast,
O-
like near Philly.
Okay, so you do not have this burger chain there, but I bet you know it. Um, In-N-Out Burger.
Yes, I've
Okay,
heard of In-N-Out,
he
yeah.
wrote that theme song that they still use. It's like, what is it? In-N-Out, In-N-Out, what a hamburger's all about. It's like, anyway, so I digress.
It's iconic.
But he's a jingle writer. He was great. So when I started I went, oh yeah, I want to write this theme song. I went straight to him, and he was all in, and we've had a creative partnership for, oh man, it's forever. He's such a good guy. So yeah, so I wrote the theme song. Wrote the pilot script, story edited the whole series, and yeah, I mean, I'm built for that kind of stuff like that.
Mhm.
It was I would it would be easier to ask me, how is it just being an actor in a show? Again, it's like I think I've answered 2 or 3 of your questions with opposite day. It's like, yeah, no, you know what? I'm more the other way, where I would
Mhm.
love to be doing all of the stuff, because that's where I come from. So just having one role as, okay, you're the mad scientist, and he's on page 4, 8, 9, 10, and then again at page 20. Oh, really? Is there anything else I can do? So, that's it's harder for me to just stay in my lane and keep my head down and be a good little actor.
I mean, well, I think it's cool that you didn't just keep your head down and stayed in your lane, because you ended up creating two and a half, as you said,
Yeah,
but two of your own shows.
yeah.
And it's really cool seeing, like, I only watched, like I said, the first episode of Being In, but I really enjoyed the humor in it. It's very zany and over the top, and that's why I was curious about what it was like to switch between being a voice actor, and then doing something that saying the lines that voice actors write, or like directing an entire show. I was also curious, in terms of writing, what was it like writing for Dragon Ball Z, and like, or like maybe any other animes you may have written for, because I would assume that's more of like a localization type of thing, right, where you had
Yeah.
to take the original dialogue or the original lines and localize it to the best of your ability.
That is correct. So Dragon Ball, interesting story. Well, to me, it's
Mm.
interesting. I had a partner at the time, and we had a little company that did a bunch of different things, but it was all in the creative space. It was, commercials, cartoons, and it involved writing. And we had gotten a reputation for reversioning, dubbing Japanese productions, whether they be animated or live action. I think most of them were animated.
Mm.
And the way it works is you get a direct translation of the production that pre-exists, and it's let's just say it's in Japanese, and someone dutifully goes through and you know um, what am I saying?
Translates it.
Translates it
Yeah.
into English, a form of English.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you read these things and you go, oh my goodness, that doesn't make any sense. And then you have to kind of make it fit, with the mouth movements and everything.
Hmm.
So we got kind of a reputation of being able to do that. We had good studios. We had technology that was fast. It was the early days of digital recording. So, we did start on tape, sort of, bzz, 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 trying to find the various cue points. But
Yeah.
anyway, we had this reputation. So then Dragon Ball, the fellers from Texas come into town and they go, "Hey, we understand you're good at this. We got this production," and all we knew was that there was a 10 billion episodes, and can you cast and make this work? And we said, yes, we can. And that's how it started. But it's not like, anyone knew, okay, Dragon Ball is going to be this
Yeah.
intense. It was just like, it's another show coming across our desk, basically.
Hmm.
And that is how it started. That's the origin story of Dragon Ball as we know it in English.
That's just wild. I can only imagine because I mean it's still going strong. 20 some odd years later. It's
Yeah.
just nuts to think that the longevity the show has had. Uh, we are starting to run low on time, so I want to ask. I want to transition over to Captain N, the game master, and
Yeah.
I we like I said at the top of the show, my buddy Dexter and I we've been doing an entire rewatch series of the show, talking about all the things we love, we don't like, the zaniness of it. So I guess I kind of said I'm going to kind of go against something I said at the beginning and ask what was it like, but like what was it like working on, like, do you have any recollections or memories of working on Captain and the Game Master?
I do. But it's more of a general thing because that was amongst the first, I don't think among the first series that I had ever done. And
Mm.
I think, you would think a man of my stature would, have a marker somewhere like, okay, that's the first cartoon I did. And I can't remember which one it was because there was kind of a flurry over a year or two period. I think I think the first one I did was a show called Kissy Fur. So
Hmm.
it was a Deke show, DIC,
Yeah.
as Captain N was. So okay, I know you're asking about Captain N,
No, it's
and
fine. It's fine.
and what I recall was this is the best thing ever. I just went, okay, I know what Nintendo is. I know
Mhm.
that. So this is going to be great because, I mean, this was still in the era of Saturday morning cartoons. And, now cartoons are everywhere. They've got their own channels. They're like, they're on demand. They're like
Yep.
anytime, anywhere. But then it was like, okay, you tuned in NBC on Saturday morning, and that's when you saw your cartoons. So that was a huge deal for me. Like it was because of the Nintendo brand. We were all kind of rookies. Let's just face it. Like the cast
Mhm.
in Vancouver, in terms of animation experience, we were rookies. There were seasoned actors,
Yeah.
Me coming from my world and others coming from their worlds. And then the fact that you will know this. Who was the voice of the flower? Mother Brain?
Oh, yeah, I was actually going to ask Levi Stubbs.
Levi Stubbs. Yeah, we went, oh, that's someone. That's
Yeah. And whenever I brought that up on the show, because most people like they don't know, people a little bit younger don't know who Levi Stubbs is, because like you don't the Four Tops doesn't really come to mind
no.
when you think of voice acting stuff. Like they may have heard of the Four Tops and some of their popular songs, but like, do you know all the names of the members of the
Right.
Four Tops? And so when I started doing the show, when I started doing this Captain N series, and I'm like, all right, Levi Stubbs, what has he's done? And I went, holy shit. Okay.
Yeah.
Only one of the most popular Motown groups of all time.
Right.
And it's just such a wild thing. Now, I wanted to ask in regards to him specifically, I know it's kind of all over the place with voiceover work, but did you ever get to act with him in studio, or was it kind of separate recording sessions?
Completely separate. Never
That's
met
what I
him, never
figured.
saw him.
It's such a bummer.
Yeah, it's the way it goes.
Yeah, because I feel like the behind the scenes has warped the audience's sense of perception of how voiceover work
Yeah.
works, because you always see all these things of like 5 different actors in the same room laughing at each other, and I'm sure there are times that happens, but
It used to be that way. It used to be that way. But especially since I moved to LA, it really underlined to me that almost nothing gets recorded that way now. And then since the pandemic, I will underline that even stronger. That everything is you're in there. If you even go into a studio, you're in there by yourself.
Yeah.
I'm fortunate. I mean, I've had every place that I've lived, I've always had a purpose-built recording studio in the house. So I've always, because I've done so many different types of VO. I'm not just an actor. Like I do promos and commercials and all sorts of stuff. So you really have to be ready. And that means that I, need a studio.
Have to be ready for whenever the work comes calling.
Exactly.
Well, we do have to wrap this up. We are getting very close to the time that you let me know that I had to let you go. So I want to wrap up this episode. I normally ask, dang it. I asked my wife for questions from, my wife's name is Courtney, and she famously doesn't know anything about like games or like animation or any of the stuff.
Someone normal.
Yeah, exactly. And she would normally send me a whole bunch of questions from Courtney, and I totally forgot to ask her for some.
I'll tell you what, I'll say it right now. We'll do a part 2, because I feel like you there's stuff you want to cover, and I'd be happy to at some point in the future, and maybe we'll work in the James Bond
questions
stuff
from Courtney. Yeah, that'll be awesome. All right, so the questions from Courtney this week, listeners, is a promise for a part 2 with Ian James Corlett. So let's wrap up this episode then. Ian, where can all the good people find you online, and is there anything you would like to promote?
Yes, there is. My good friend and colleague, Trevor Duvall, who you would know as Rocket from Guardians of the Galaxy cartoon, and many other things, Star Wars cartoons and stuff like that. We just started our very own podcast because no one else is doing it. So we thought, let's try that newfangled. Anyway, it's called The Reactors, because we're actors who react. And it's available. It like literally just last week it dropped. So search up The Reactors in either under my name or Trevor Duvall, and on your favorite podcast platform. It's everywhere. So go find that. And online, the best way to find me is Instagram. It's at Ian James Corlett. And I'm also on Twitter at, as we discussed, Ian James 007. But really, the one I tend to, if we're going to use gardening terms,
Mhm.
is the Instagram feed, and that's where, if you want to see what I'm up to or send me a note or whatever, that's where you can find me.
All right. I was surprised I wasn't following you on there, so I just gave you a follow.
All
So there
right.
we go. Fix that problem. As for me, as usual, you can follow me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at StillLoadingPod on all of them. If you want to email me, you can email me stillloadingcontact@gmail.com. If you want to support the show, you can do so in a number of ways. You can give it a 5-star rating or review on Apple Podcast or whichever podcasting app you use, because that makes me feel warm and fuzzy, and I like feeling warm and fuzzy. You can also support the show monetarily, patreon.com/stillloadingpod. For $1 a month, you'll get all the episodes like this one a few days early at a higher bit rate, as well as access to patron polls, so you can vote on upcoming topics for the show. For $4 a month, you'll get everything at the $1 level, plus access to 2 mini bonus episodes a month, which has a bunch of variety of different topics. And then for $5 a month, you'll get everything at the previous 2 levels, plus access to Still Bonding, which I mentioned before, the Patreon exclusive podcast where 2 friends bond over 007. And like I said, at the time this one's coming out, Live and Let Die will hopefully have been out, assuming that I'm able to figure out this recording situation that I have going on with it. But if it's going to be Live and Let Die or Man with a Golden Gun, I'm not quite sure when this episode will drop yet. So, but that's all found at patreon.com/stillloadingpod. And of course, the final shout out, the Bit by Bit Foundation. The Bit by Bit Foundation is a nonprofit organization whose mission is to put video games and video game consoles in the hands of kids receiving inpatient care at hospitals. So if you want to support them, go to bitbybitfoundation.org and consider donating. And that is all the time I have for you today. Ian, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It was my pleasure.
No, sincerely, thank you. I had a lot of fun talking to you, and I'm looking forward to our part 2. So with that all said, listeners, I will see you all next time.